So today I am pleased to welcome to the studio John Arvanitis, Associate Managing Director for Compliance at Kroll. John, welcome to the studio.
Hi, Richard. Thank you for having me today.
It's a pleasure. So, John, this will be the third year that we have the opportunity to talk about the Kroll Ethisphere Anti-Bribery and Corruption Benchmarking Report. So thank you for returning to the studio this year.
As always, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thanks so much. And first, a little bit about your background. You spent 27 years with the Justice Department in the DEA, finishing your career as the Special Agent in charge of the New England Field Division. So, John, congratulations and thank you for your service.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I was fortunate to work with a lot of great individuals in that time.
Well, and I'll tell you, I did not do justice to your work experience by just citing that last chapter. So I would refer anyone who would like to read more about your experience and perspective to your bio on the Kroll website. So let's start with the good news on the benchmarking report. And my understanding is this is available on the Kroll website?
Yes, it is.
Terrific. So, John, the report notes a significant change with respect to how executive leadership now views their anti-bribery and compliance programs as more than a regulatory safeguard, but also as a brand and reputational safeguard. But it's not overwhelming, John, and one would think that that would just be a given. So is this still the evolution of compliance?
Well, Richard, I think that that's a really, really interesting statement that you just made.
Right.
I think what we have today is, with the advent of the Yates Memo, the pilot program, and other documents that the department has brought forward for compliance professionals to review, understand, and implement to ensure their compliance programs meets expectation, C-suite involvement that is getting to where it should be. I think what we've seen now is the days of deferred prosecutions and huge fines gone, and desire to want to hold people personally accountable for decisions.
I mean, do you think it's also part of our global corporate scandals? And they don't even necessarily have to be anti-bribery scandals. I'm thinking about Wells Fargo and Volkswagens. Do you think the C-suite is now saying, what do we need to do to make sure that's never us, and that's getting their attention as well?
Absolutely. I think accountability is paramount, and I think the message is being brought forward not only to the C-suite, but also by the C-suite to the rest of the enterprise.
Well, I hear a lot of compliance leaders share that they're experiencing a little bit of compliance fatigue. Now, usually I think of compliance fatigue as when the workforce is getting a little fatigued with all their compliance trading. But this is a little different. This is compliance leaders sharing, how do I get my leadership engaged? How do I get them realizing that ethics and compliance isn't a support function, but needs to be part of the corporate narrative? So have you seen any best practices with respect to how compliance leaders are getting the attention of the C-suite other than just busting through the door?
Busting through the door usually doesn't work, as we know, in corporate America. I think what we're looking for here now is engaging the C-suite, inviting the C-suite to participate and add value to the compliance program as is, its development, and its execution. I think one of the greatest things that I've seen in my time with Kroll and working with compliance professionals is the use of compliance teams, bringing forward compliance committees that have a member representing multiple business lines, but also having someone from the C-suite come down and participate in discussions and dialogues and understanding where the risk is and what the issues are that the organization is faced with.
So do you see them doing that in a formal sense, like these compliance committees that you're talking about, and also in an informal sense of just making sure that business leadership stays engaged on these issues?
I think both are very, very important, and I've seen both, to answer your question.
Well, what about, we've been talking about managing up, but what about managing across? The report does address cross-functional support and collaboration, and the report specifically talks about compliance working with IT teams. So can you share why growth and collaboration between compliance and information security is growing? And John, why is it so important?
I think, Richard, in today's data privacy and data security environment and all the issues that have been in the media over the last 30 to 60 days revolving around data, this has become at the forefront of compliance and cooperation and partnership in organizations and multinational organizations. GDPR impacts that, but I think really where the rubber meets the road is when an organization has to collect, process, share, and store data of their third parties and their other partners. You have a responsibility to maintain the integrity of that data, as well as explain to those individuals how you're going to maintain that integrity.
Okay. It's like the government said, it's one thing to do something, but if you're not documenting it and preserving it, what's the sense?
Look, there's two key pieces to that, as we know. Maintenance, that's a huge piece, but also documentation, as you just described. That's where having a very, very robust program with policies and procedures and the ways that you do business and the way that you keep the data safe is imperative.
And is it also about detection? In other words, using data to detect anomalies in expense reports, for example, and just sort of red flagging different variables that can be data tracked to bring that to the attention of a compliance leader?
I think you beat me to it, Richard, but I think that accounting is one of your key partners within your organizations. They are, to use your term, a gatekeeper for potential suspicious transactions that are brought forward and by certain members of the organization that might involve third-party engagement.
Well, that's interesting because last year's report talked about how internal audit can be a valuable partner to a compliance leader and a compliance program. So that also brings in that relevancy through the data side.
Sure. I think that IT, as we talked about, accounting and audit play key roles in partnering with compliance, but I think also to working with your sales teams in these organizations is important. They're your boots on the ground. They're the people who interact and engage with potential third parties and entities, and they should be well educated and trained to be able to understand what the compliance program entails, what the messaging is, and what the risks are in dealing with third parties and entities.
Do you see that as a two-way relationship, though? I mean, I always share who understands risk better than the people who work in it every day. I mean, do you see that there's greater compliance desire to hear from the front lines and say, look, if our program's not getting it right, if we're not addressing the real-world risks that you're facing, come talk to us about it. You know, we want to hear what you have to say as much as we want you to hear what we have to say.
I think the message is that you don't want to handpick who you want to hear from, but you want to hear from everyone within an organization. Like we talked about earlier, the more information you can collect, the more information you can analyze, thus better be prepared to drive decision-making to protect the organization.
Sure. What are some of the other support functions that you have seen in terms of cross-functional collaboration that can bring value to a compliance program and a compliance team? Look, a lot of programs are lean, so this is a little bit about, hey, how can we do more with less?
Look, we know that procurement's a huge partner, right?
Okay.
They manage the third-party processes and onboarding stages for most multinational corporations. But I think the legal and general counsel's office should also be a key stakeholder in being able to oversee the day-to-day activities. Back again to the compliance committee, bringing all those people together, you are able to get input and insight that separately you may never be able to get from them and having a conversation one-on-one with them. As we talked about, you give people an opportunity to speak, they will speak. You should be prepared to listen.
Terrific. Well, John, we'll look forward to coming back and we'll talk a little bit more about third-party risk in our next chapter.
Sounds great.
Terrific.